So we're here with Jay Rosen. Hi, Jay.
Hi there.
How's it going? Thanks for joining us.
Good. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. Our first in a series of live events with Olim, who are living and loving life in Israel. And we're
drink in hand, of course. We'll get to that.
We got to know what's in there. So Jay, we'll get into this soon, but Jay is a mixologist. Is that correct? Can I call you that?
I would say an amateur mixologist. Yeah.
Okay, so you're not a certified mixologist. You need a certificate or a degree or diploma.
It's a great self-appraised title.
Okay, I'll also use it, so it's not just self-appraised. So what's in your drawer? I have to say that I challenged Jay to go mix a drink about 2 minutes before we went live. I was very impressed because he came back within about 30 seconds. So tell us what can you make in 30 seconds?
I can make a lot in 30 seconds. So one of my social initiatives is about creating a better understanding of the Middle East through cocktails and cocktail culture, and recognizing that the Middle East is the history of, you can't tell the history of the Middle East without the history of alcohol and vice versa. So I made a really
you can't understand the history of Middle East without understanding the history of its alcohol?
Alcohol. Yep. Well, alcohol in general, because beer and wine originated from here in the Middle East thousands of years ago. Distillation that gives us all those stronger spirits started here in the Middle East. Even to this day, it's created. So I wanted to make something that was local, because we're talking Aliyah. And so I made it really quick with actually one of the local distilleries I work with, which is called Golani. It's up in the Golan, hence its name. One of its founders actually is also an Oleh from Canada. So true spirit. David Seibel.
Okay.
Is their Golani whiskey with maple syrup, maple flavor, because he's Canadian. And this guy I picked is from another distillery up in the north of Israel called Julius. It's a guy who's originally from the Tel Aviv area. He gave up whatever corporate life he was living, I think it was corporate. He moved up and he started this awesome distillery using local fruits and herbs. So this guy is Herbal Tonic, which is actually kasher lePesach. So those are
what's it made out of?
So this is it's got, I forget how many herbs they put in this thing, but it's got a good couple dozen in there.
And all local.
All local. It's got some of the classics that you find in more European things, but it also has za'atar in there and wild sage and all sorts of things that are local here. And it's kasher lePesach. So getting ready for that.
Wow, amazing. All right, we're getting a lot of comments that we're turning this into an alcohol show. So I'd like to reassure our viewers that we are not going to only be talking about alcohol tonight, I promise. We just wanted to get something interesting going before we got into the juicy details of who Jay Rosen is. So Jay, take a drink. Tell us who you are. Go back. Where were you born? Go all the way back. I want to hear it all.
So again, my name is Jay. It's actual Jay. That usually confuses a lot of Israelis, both because the J sound is not part of the Hebrew alphabet, but also most people think it's short for something. It's not J-A-Y.
It's just J-A-Y. It's not J-A-Y, or it is J-A-Y?
It is J-A-Y.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Originally from Washington, D.C., actual D.C., no suburbs. So that often also confuses people. We call ourselves a little bit last of the Mohicans. Those of us who are Washingtonian Jews, not Maryland or Virginia suburban Jews. If you were to look at my history on paper, you would say, of course, this guy made Aliyah. I grew up with a community, both in the Jewish community, grew up in Addis Israel congregation, one of the biggest congregations in D.C., if not on the East Coast, in the country for sure. I went to Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School for middle school and high school, again, one of the day schools in the country. Then ended up in college activism, then ended up working for Taglit, and then made Aliyah, right? On paper, this is like the normal trajectory. I'd like to think it's not. Not just because I've always tried to be different, but also There's a lot more of the personal story there. I started off in D.C. public school. My parents wanted to have a more diverse, holistic approach and understanding of the world before anything else. And Jewish day school, as much as I knew some of the people there, and still means quite a lot, and I wouldn't have made Aliyah were it not for that Jewish education, was very difficult. It was a largely suburban cohort, very homogenous. Either they grew up with each other, but again, you know what I'm talking about. And that was very jarring for a long time. And when it came to Israel, I didn't grow up. I grew up again with a strong Jewish identity and background, but not Israel at the center of it. I had never been to Israel until I was 18 and came with my graduating cohort from high school. I don't have any relatives here. We have third degree relatives.
Zero, no distant, no second cousins.
We have third degree relatives that we met for the first time when my dad was here for the first time 9 years ago, and I've been here.
Oh, so your dad was here for the first time 9 years ago.
Yeah, and I've been here 14 and a half. So again, Israel's didn't play that role that it plays for a lot of families. And even the first time I came to Israel, and I'm going to be very blunt with our audience today, I did not like it at first. I could understand everything that was happening. I have a natural tendency to learn languages well and fast. So I was already rather fluent in Hebrew. It wasn't that I didn't get what was going on. It just didn't mean anything to me. The rebellious teenager in me was like, I don't want to be here. This is not what I was sold. It was the end of February 2000. It was cold. It was wet. It was teenager, people our age in America coming from the late 90s. Unfortunately, we had that whole spate of gun violence in schools and seeing soldiers walking around with us. Something was very disconnecting.
Right.
And the more I had time to myself, because it was the first half of the year 2000. It was a very safe, quiet period in Israel history, for those of you who remember it. The more we had time to ourselves, the more free time we had in the evenings, and we were staying in Jerusalem for 2 months, so able to roam the streets. And Jerusalem is a very, I'll say, interesting place. If it's your first time out of your respective community, it's not the easiest place to be. It's a very challenging place in many ways, as familiar as it may be. But things started to click, and things started to make sense in my head. And then I started university at NYU in September of 2000, the start of the second.
My alma mater.
Love it. There's more than 1,000 of us here in Israel.
I know. I know. They keep emailing me. I'm on there.
That's also me. Sorry,
is it?
I'm the boy. I'm sorry.
It's great. I love it.
Right? And starting school at that time, I really wanted to do nothing necessarily Jewish or Israel focused. I had this great experience, but I wanted to trek on my own. I still had this strong interest in diplomacy, international relations. I wanted to perfect my Spanish, all sorts of other things. And then the Intifada started. And I felt this growing sense of obligation inside me that here I just came from 4 months in Israel with an even longer Jewish history, background, education, Israel understanding. And I had to say something. And I had to, and watching the Jewish students on campus struggle to find the words to explain their connection or explain basic history really made me feel I needed to step up. And so I did. I got involved in campus activism and Israel activism, in addition to studying Hebrew and getting to a much higher level than I was even at beforehand. I started taking Arabic classes, which, by the way, is one of the easiest A's you'll ever take. If you need that.
It's one of the easiest languages you'll ever take?
If you have Hebrew as a strong background, and we'll talk about Hebrew. We have Arabic.
I'll interject too for everyone who has joined us recently, and we just went live on Instagram. Sorry about the delay. We are here talking with Jay Rosen. Jay Rosen lives in Tel Aviv, and he teaches our Tel Aviv hub members Hebrew every week, once a week, Jay?
Once a week.
It's once a week, right? Yeah. You may be going back, hopefully in person to the hub. Or you have already gone back to the hub? Yeah, hopefully, we're hoping. But for now, it's virtual, so anybody can join, which is nice. That's been great, right? You've gotten
people
awesome. From
we have
really
a huge, or at least more than 100 every week, which is
that's amazing. Yeah, it's from all over now, so it's not just limited to our beautiful offices which is really nice to be in.
Exactly.
But hopefully we'll get back there, and then you can continue broadcasting while teaching people in person.
With pleasure, if not doing it twice. Either way.
That'd be great. Yeah. So we're talking about how Jay is an amateur mixologist. We are now getting into the hows and whys and how the heck he got to Israel in the first place, how he fell in love with Israel. We haven't yet gotten to the part where he's fallen in love with Israel. And we're going to continue hearing his story. Yeah, we just got there.
We just got there. So in the course of doing Israel activism on campus, and it was the second intifada, it was really much all hands on deck. Whoever was interested was. And there was a advocacy mission done through Hillel International. I believe it was 2002. Was a week of about several hundred students coming from around the world to take place in Jerusalem. And then there was an extended trip to take classes at TAU and to study around Tel Aviv University, and travel around the country. And that trip started putting in my head, maybe this is an option. If I can be here in this extended period, albeit fully, organized trips, not staying, paying my own way and things like that. But if I can be here in the height of what's already a tense situation, and it's not for us, even going to some very dicey places, in retrospect, I can't believe we went, something started clicking, like this makes sense. And then I ended up getting bumped on that flight back. And so I had a free ticket. So I came back the following winter. And then I found just keep coming back. And something just clicked. There were the initial thoughts I had from my first trip when I was 18. That I was then further discovering when I was 20. I was also blessed to go to NYU, right? If I wanted to replicate Israeli food or Israeli people, where a better place to do it than Manhattan and Brooklyn combined. So it was not for lack of opportunities. And then I get to senior year. I didn't want to do anything, again, Israel or Jewish related. I had enough of it. I wanted to do something with my Middle Eastern studies, Arabic, whatever. Very hard, by the way.
Gorgeous building at NYU, by the way. The Middle Eastern studies.
Oh, yeah.
The building
is
beautiful.
And it was proving difficult. I was traveling between D.C. and New York trying to find a job. And the last place I looked was a new position that started that at the very least would get me back to Israel on a regular basis. It was the first of its kind between three major Jewish organizations in North America. And I was the guinea pig of them trying to work together for the first time. So it was the local federation, the local Hillels of Greater Washington, and Birthright Israel, creating an alumni association with me focusing on the college campuses. And in the course of not only traveling to Israel and staffing some of the trips, but it was more about helping students process their experience in Israel, what it meant to them, if anything, hearing their experience, what it meant, and what, if anything, it has in connection with their life on campus. And the more hearing the stories, and especially the students who didn't feel comfortable doing anything organized Jewishly on campus, things start to click even more. Like, this is so much more of a diverse experience than we ever tell. And their own experiences are amazing. They would be their instant advertisement for all these Jewish organizations, and yet these people don't feel comfortable going there. How can we tell this story a little bit better? And by that point, it was already clear I was going to move here for some period. By coming here a lot, that also prepped my family, my parents especially, to feel comfortable for me being here for long periods of time. And then 2006, 2 years after I graduated from university, I made Aliyah. From there, it was where to go from there. So back in the day, this was 2006, the vast majority of North American Olim, were they secular, religious, single, or family, moved to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the default city. And I also knew Jerusalem very well. My very close friends from NYU moved to Tel Aviv, which they loved it. And at that time, Tel Aviv was completely Hebrew only. Not that it didn't have the Hebrew.
What year is this?
This is 2006 to, I would say, 2008, 9.
Okay.
There was very little infrastructure for internationals, for Olim, for Anglos in Tel Aviv.
I'm sad to hear that, because I helped start a community in Tel Aviv back in the day, I'm not gonna say when. Early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s, and then White City popped up after that. But if you know anything about Minyan Yichud Olam, Minyan Bashamayim, and Ben Yehuda, so that was my friends and I started that. So
nice.
we're hoping that there was at least that at the time, right? Okay.
There was definitely
maybe feel better.
It wasn't.
Right. No, it wasn't what it was. Now. It wasn't what it is now, for sure.
And I moved to Jerusalem mainly for work and for school. I started graduate studies at Hebrew. I then transferred to IDC. But Jerusalem felt more like what I wanted. It was more, the Middle East. It was more this unique place. I wasn't moving to another version of North America or anything like that. It really felt unique. And then through a combination of work opportunities and social, I moved to Tel Aviv. And it was very jarring at first. It still is a jarring experience. I've been in Tel Aviv now almost 10 years. Thank God, in the same apartment. Got to knock on wood somewhere. Because anyone in Tel Aviv, that is a very rare situation to be in this apartment for that long.
Yeah. I wish we never left our first apartment.
I am truly blessed with my apartment.
But do you have a parking spot?
So I don't drive. I don't even have a license back in America. So I'm a city boy through and through.
Yeah.
Not to say the desert and the forests of Israel don't appeal to me, but yeah, I need to be in the city. But I would say that in the course of being here in Tel Aviv and then going from a nonprofit educational background to a for-profit background and specifically working on this internationalization of Tel Aviv, you quickly saw it, right? In the last 5-6 years, a lot of the work I was doing through my clients was getting in the press of New York Times and Cosmopolitan and Vogue and all these lifestyle clients that showed Israel could be a destination, and Tel Aviv specifically could be a destination on par with other global destinations. And that has, I think, helped a lot with my own experience here in Tel Aviv. And similarly, turning my initial feelings of obligation to be a part of what happens here, what happens in the Jewish world, together to the next step. And that brings in what I currently do with my job, what I do with volunteering. So about 3.5 years ago, I started my own company. It's called Ḥayyati, which when you transliterate it, Hayyati, it transliterates into Hebrew as my tailor, like tailoring your shirt.
Right.
And in Arabic as my life. And the idea is to help entrepreneurs, small businesses, nonprofits, anyone who's starting small, looking to get to a larger audience, and really helping them craft their voice, craft their communications. Because oftentimes we have amazing, wonderful visions and wonderful ideas and wonderful products, but we don't think about the marketing, the packaging of it until it's ready to go to market, and then it's too late. And if we're not thinking about the communications, the marketing behind what we do, as we're developing it, we're already running backwards when we get to it. And that, combined with starting to teach Hebrew with Nefesh B'Nefesh as a volunteer, and starting a few other social initiatives, helped translate for me this obligation, which can be very exhausting after a while, into a place of advocacy. As nonpartisan as I can be, not just in this webinar, but in general, to say that we as Olim, and I call ourselves Olim by choice, whether you're coming from North America or the UK or other places, we're the last wave of Aliyah that's out there. We're a huge potential wave, but and as opposed to all the previous waves of Aliyah in Israel's history, we're moving here by choice. We're looking to build bayit. Bayit is the Hebrew word for house. We're not looking for miklat, which is the Hebrew word for shelter, right? For shelter is everyone escaping from Muslim countries or from Eastern Europe or from even South America with regards to economic reasons. We're not building that miklat. We're not seeking that. We're building a house. And so when you move here by choice, whatever that choice, that reason may be, that gives us a lot more privilege and a lot more, I think, obligation to pay it forward. What can we do to help each other out? What can we do to help Israeli society, hopefully simultaneously? Yeah, so where else can I go from there? So my clients currently are both Israel's a great proof of concept for what I'm trying to do, being the startup nation. But the startup nation, as I explained in one of the webinars I give, is very much the distillation, talking about alcohol here, of thousands of years of Jewish history, right? It's the culmination of being scrappy and resourceful, of intercommunal giving and philanthropy, and also the idea of providing for each other, helping each other out in need. And as Israel transitioned from a more socialist economy to more capitalist, what needed to be filled in to make Israel still a prosperous country for all its citizens. So
Israel's great. I was just going to interrupt. Israel's great at so many things. But where you come in probably and where you're needed the most is telling their story. Israel's PR has not always been amazing. And a lot of Israel mentality is basically, if we build it, they will come. So if we have this amazing product and we have really genius startups and products and services here, and we firmly believe that if we have a great product, then people will naturally want to buy it or to use it. But what's missing is that the story, and that's what you do.
The story is missing, the nuance, the polishing that's needed for an international audience. Again, exactly as you said, there's this notion that if it's made in Israel, especially when we talk about startups and high tech, that sells itself, and it really doesn't. Right. We're at a much more nuanced, normalized place in our history as Jews, as Israelis. That's not going to cut it. You really have, if we're going to compete on a global level, like we keep aspiring and keep claiming to be, then we have to do that. And that means telling why we're building something and not relying on our broken English and thinking it's still charming to people, or showing up to investors in a rumpled t-shirt, or even worse, a rumpled colored shirt, thinking that it's going to be enough. And then pushing back when they ask you some serious questions. Like, there's a lot of cross-cultural stuff we've taken for granted a long time. The Israel-diaspora relationship can be a lot more sophisticated than it currently is. One of the things I advocate a lot for is for us as Olim by choice to be that necessary bridge between the two sides. We, by virtue of moving here, whether we're fluent or not in Hebrew is irrelevant. We're much more fluent with Israeli culture and society and how it works to be a better interlocutor, a better mediator between the two sides, even though the two sides up till now, up until recently, I'm not going to say up till now, up until recently, didn't really know what to do with us, right? Israel didn't know what to do with us because our English obviously is native language. We're coming with a certain quality of life that we can't always find here, although it's changing. And backwards as well. Jewish communities in America, as strong as they are, they didn't know how to deal with people making Aliyah. I once posited to a federation to think of it the same way we talk of engagement as membership dues to a synagogue or a JCC. Isn't Aliyah the same thing? Aren't we showing and strengthening our Jewish identity by taking on this mantle of full-time Israeli citizenship?
Right.
I think
we're always saying, speaking of mantle, we're always saying, if you're teaching your students to wear tzitzit in the Jewish day schools, then, why aren't you teaching them the mitzvah of Aliyah? It's the same, it's comparable. It's a comparable in measure in mitzvah points, right?
Mitzvah points, it goes to, Avraham Infeld, who's a tremendous Jewish educator in our generation, talks about the three-legged stool, that there are 6 different ways, there are 6 different options of identifying as a Jew, and you need 3 of them to have a stool. And one of them is the national identity that up until soon to be 73 years ago, we didn't have. And that's an integral part of what it means to be a Jew that we can now fulfill. And it's globalization at the same time. It's the inherent definition of globalization that we can now embody, which is awesome because we've as Jews for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. Yep. And so that agency is also one of the reasons why I've come to start volunteering, quite by chance, I gotta say, teaching Hebrew at Nefesh B'Nefesh, but I'll also teach Hebrew at LGBT Olim, another organization helping Olim, specifically from the LGBTQ community, to find themselves in Israeli society, in both here in Tel Aviv, but throughout the city, country, in Jerusalem, Haifa, Beersheba, up in the north as well. It started out by obligation as well, right? We had here in Tel Aviv, Nefesh B'Nefesh opened up a hub, a shared workspace a couple years ago. And one of the activities they had during the day was a catered lunch. And the only provision for joining it for free was that you had to speak in Hebrew. And just like being back in college where there was maybe 2 or 3 of us interfaith to talk honestly about our Jewish identity, there were maybe 2 or 3 of us at this table of 20 or 30 people who felt comfortable enough to speak in Hebrew.
It's also very difficult to speak Hebrew to other native English speakers. I find it very unnatural. I have no problem speaking Hebrew to Hebrew speakers, but to speak Hebrew among with my friends and who are English speakers.
I hear that. I mean, I'm a contrarian in that all my friends from NYU who also made Aliyah, we speak in Hebrewish.
Really? Hebrewish, right?
It's often more Hebrew than English.
Really?
But it depends on our
that's impressive.
Mood for the day. But after a few rounds of this, Karen, one of the tremendous staff at Nefesh B'Nefesh, asked, we're actually thinking of starting our own ulpan, or at least some sort of classwork. Is anyone interested in helping? And just like I always do, just like I have always been taught to do, I raised my hand and said, yeah, I'll do it. And that turned into what we have now, Cafe Ole, which first started in the boardroom.
I love that name.
It's a great name. It's an awesome name.
Who came up with the name?
I think they did. I think it was Karen and the rest of the staff. And they went out with a whiteboard and answering people's questions. And it evolved into something that really serves a need when you talk to Olim by choice, in that whatever their issues are with Ulpan and whatever their issues are with learning a new language, especially fellow Americans. Americans, we have a really hard time learning other languages, and it's not a cognitive thing, right? We know statistically the people who have cognitive issues learning is a minutia of population. It's a cultural thing. It's a social thing. Yeah. But it's also about what they're being taught and what they're not being taught. I remember learning Hebrew in day school until I got to advanced level. And that year, 8th grade, it stuck in my head. It's still stuck in my head. But everything else was being taught from, the books they were giving to Russian Olim. So it was all about engineering and going to the theater. And it even had Russian in the back with the English. And you see that again. You see what they're learning in Ulpan is just outdated. And not just that it's outdated, it's not built for an audience that has the capacity and has the desire the moment they land in Israel to start living their life as it was, meaning renting an apartment, paying bills, finding a job. They're not going to live in a Melkaz Klita, an absorption center. They're not going to live in the middle of nowhere. They want to be replicating as much of their life in diaspora here as much. And
which we don't always counsel, we don't always advise people to strive for replication.
And I totally agree with that. It's not good to totally replicate because, first off, resources aren't always there to totally replicate. But second, in all of my work with Taglit, working at universities, the people who have the biggest culture shock in Israel are North Americans, because we typically come here on organized trips. And the moment we have to do real life things here.
The moment it's not vacation anymore.
It's not vacation. And that switch and realizing Israel is a much more Eurocentric style culture, and the pace of life is very different, and expectations are different, and quality of life is different, people freeze. And that mantra that was around, at least when I made Aliyah all those years ago, of Aliyah is forever and ever, hits people really hard, and they freeze and they get really panicked. And that's why we used to have the statistics like we do about people leaving or going back. I think it's a lot more fluid than what those statistics say, because it's often politicized who's talking about that. But the point is to say, let's change that. I'm no longer, I guess, in a place in my life where I'm okay just complaining. I'm very good at complaining, don't get me wrong.
We're all good at complaining. It's in our DNA.
Right? But what can I do to fix this? And Cafe Ole is one of my several attempts to fix something in Israeli society. So what we do is we focus on everyday Hebrew. I will literally take a page. Do I even have it here? I have a slip from the electric company, Chevrat Chashmal. This isn't the bill. This is the new letter that's incredibly complicated to understand about how they're changing the price on your bi-monthly bill based on how they read the meter. If you're fresh off the boat, even if you have, let's say, Kita Gimel Dalet Hebrew, you don't understand what is going on here, because this is everyday Hebrew. This is not...
Yeah, because my Kita Gimel or Daled kid is not going to understand that electric bill, for sure.
Exactly. This is not the Hebrew you're learning outside of the land of Israel, where it's not used 24/7. This is very complicated Hebrew, even for Israelis. So we do that. We go over utility bills. We go over how to shop in a supermarket, not just a sale and the different, and how to, be a little bit more savvy as a consumer, but how to read a nutrition label, right? How to understand the word that for elements in Hebrew, like that Hebrew is actually used in the hard sciences. Like what's the word for, calcium and sodium and all those things you need to know if you're on a diet, but also read the news. Even if you're at a beginner's level, I'll take you through the top page of online news sources in Israel and how to navigate it to know, do I need to read this and translate it? Do I not? What services are out there to help me with Hebrew? And by the way,
what the hardest, what's that?
Terrible. Google Translate.
Terrible?
Please don't trust on. Please don't trust on.
No, it's good to warn people about that. The hardest words for me to read in Hebrew are the English words that are transliterated. It once took me...
I remember in one of my Hebrew classes in university, the teacher came in, didn't say anything. She gave all of us a printed out copy from, I think it was Ynet, Yediot Ahronoth, which is the biggest ones here. And she just gave it to us and didn't say anything, and then asked someone to start reading. And everyone's very confident, and I knew what she was going to do, but I wasn't saying anything. And all these people who went through the ranks and were really confident they could read this, and you could see their teeth like shattering onto the table because it was all transliterated English.
Yeah, it's all transliterated English. It's impossible. Or names, because there's no capitalization in Hebrew. People come across a name and they think, they're assuming it's a word and they can't figure out, but they can't find the shoresh, they can't find the root of the word because it's a name or it's a transliterated word. Those are impossible. It once took me I'm not proud of this, about 10 minutes to figure out on a box of tea, it said Earl Grey. And it was on a box of tea and I still couldn't read it. I was like, oh, I could not because it didn't make...
It's terrible, yeah. Oh my gosh.
How did you get so good at your Hebrew?
So I have a natural thing for languages. It's really, yes, I've been learning Hebrew.
But you can't say that to people because then they're just going to give up and say, well, you have a natural talent for language. Forget it. I don't.
I'm going to say that about myself. I have a natural thing for languages. Yes, I've been learning it since second, third grade in Hebrew school and then in Jewish day school and then in university and then being in Israel quite a lot. So it all filters in, but I also know several other languages. We're going to put that part aside. When cracked the code about Hebrew, and this I'm happy to share with our audience tonight. When I cracked the code about Hebrew, it made it infinitely easier. Hebrew is a logical language.
I feel like we need a drum roll. You're going to crack the code for us.
Infinitely more logical than English. There are no, the amount of exceptions to the rule and irregular verbs in English, they don't exist in Hebrew. Almost everything in Hebrew has a rule. Hebrew is algebra. It has equations that you're plugging the variables, which are the shoresh, those three-letter roots that we're told create all sorts of words. You plug it into the equation, which are the forms, the binyanim, the structures that give us the actual words and the grammar. Figure out both of those things, the general meaning of a shoresh and the meaning of the binyan. You've cracked the code. You can even make words up on the spot that 9 times out of 10, a native Hebrew speaker will understand you. Even if you just made up the word, they can figure it out because you crack the code. When I tell that to people, it's like, stop thinking about it as a language issue, think about it as a math issue and deal with all your hate issues with learning math.
A lot of people have math phobia though, so you're going to run into trouble with that one.
I know, that's why I say algebra. I certainly don't say trig. It's algebra. It's like 7th, 8th grade algebra, folks. Really, like 2x plus 3y equals z. That's it. That's all you have to do.
All right.
So yeah,
that's a good tip.
That obligation and that awareness. So I've started a few other initiatives. One is this alcohol one we started at the beginning, but another one specifically for Olim, which is called the Here and There Club. The idea was when I moved from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, it's a bit like, those of you from the States, it's a bit like moving from D.C. to New York. Two cities in their respective countries. But whereas DC
very different cities.
is the hub of the government, it's also a much more intellectual city. it's a lot more of a thinking city. It's not that New York isn't, and it's not that Tel Aviv isn't. It's just a different kind of thinking. Whereas Tel Aviv, like New York, is much more arts, finance focused, not the politics, philosophy side of things. And that was frustrating for me because I saw this growing wave of Olim moving to Tel Aviv who all have at least one undergraduate degree. A lot of potential, not using it, or at least me not seeing it. So I wanted to find a way that they could feel comfortable finding their voice and finding their place in Israeli society. So I created this thing called the Here and There Club, which is a series of salon gatherings, like the 18th and 19th century European notion of a salon, where people gathered in each other's living rooms to talk about the issues of the day and from different walks of life, and to hopefully be motivated to create change. And the same idea was here in people's homes. And it's also a very Israeli phenomenon, by the way. We call it in Hebrew a chug bait, where you meet in people's homes and you do something together. So take those two notions, creating a space. I'm a trained facilitator and mediator. So it was also, it couldn't just be a soapbox, right? This isn't a Facebook group where you get to rant about how expensive things are. It's not that. It's take those frustrations and what does that say about life in Israel and what we can do to change it. And that's the motivation behind it. We talk about the issues that really affect us and are very difficult to talk about, but we find a way to talk about it in a facilitated way. And it's also for Olim only. Sabras, native Israelis, are not welcome for the main reason that they have their resources to do that in Israeli society. But number two, there's this almost knee-jerk judgment that many of them come with, and they don't even know they come with it, of, oh, you didn't grow up here, you don't understand. Or you didn't serve in the army, you don't quite get it. It's like, no. I have the same rights as native-born Israeli, regardless of who they are, because I'm Aliyah. By virtue of making Aliyah, by choosing this mantle of citizenship, I have even more of an obligation to find myself in society and make my voice heard. One of the highlights was something a little bit less than the salon gathering was the last time we had municipal elections here in Israel. It was the first time we did it nationwide. Every municipality, big and small, had elections on the same day. I helped organize through my through this initiative 2 town hall meetings with every party that was running for Tel Aviv City Council, both for the mayor and for the city council. Every one of the parties showed up. It was altogether more than 300 people. Had we done it on, it would be even more people. And we really put people on the spot in the way that only we Anglos, we North Americans, UK, elsewhere from the West, know how to do in terms of having local representation on a local or national level. So asking them, what are you going to do for me? You're going to answer to me because I vote you in. You need to talk to me, not to your talking points, not to the head of your party. And it was a real changing point, so much so that now you see ahead of elections next week, every organization is having a similar type of model. And that's a really important point of us reclaiming back the importance as voters and recall how that worked of good governance and accountability in our respective countries of origin here in Israel and paying it forward in that respect.
Great, amazing work. How do you have time for your actual parnasa, the food, the job that puts food on the table?
It helps to be self-employed, so everything just rolls together.
And you've been able to continue all this virtually?
Everything has been virtual. If anything, work has been busier because everyone has shifted online and they need help translating and articulating themselves to an online audience as opposed to an offline one, which is great for them. It's a lot of work for me, but I'm happy and honored to do it. And it also gives me the opportunity to get to more places and travel for work. Even during the pandemic, I escaped the second lockdown with a good friend to Turkey for a month.
Oh, wow. For a month. Wow.
And was able to keep doing work and even get new clients from there. So all my dev goals were being hit during this very, very odd past year.
Yeah, it's been odd. It's a good word for it. I wanted to hear a little bit more. We were talking before we went live about your family and how your father's first trip to Israel was several years after you made Aliyah.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
A big question that a lot of people that I always ask Olim is how supportive was their family when they decided to make Aliyah?
That's a great question. So My parents have unconditional support for me. It is a blessing to have that. I don't take that for granted. I have been also fortunate because of work and different things to be able to go back at least twice a year. So for Pesach and Rosh Hashanah, I'm able to go back. I'm also really good at finding cheap flights, so that makes it even easier.
You're going to have a lot of people chatting you up after this.
Flights have gotten incredibly cheap since making Aliyah 14 and a half years ago. It's very easy to pick, though. You have to fly through Europe. No direct flight, and it's a lot cheaper. It's not that bad as a connection. Anyways, very supportive. My dad actually is having a minor procedure today, so definitely thinking about that quite a bit.
We all wish you hachlama mira and a smooth
procedure. Amen, amen, amen. As much as that makes it harder, again, technology makes things easier, that we can always be in touch, even if we're not, but we know it's there. Flights are cheaper than they used to be, even if we're not on a plane all the time. It's also setting up expectations. I think one of the things I remark on a lot with friends about Aliyah is that it forces you to make and think about life in a way that if I had stayed in the US, I didn't necessarily have to think about, or I would take for granted. Things like planning, not just financial planning, but what do we do if, God forbid, someone gets ill or passes away? For myself, for them. Like, we have to make some very much more mature decisions that we necessarily have to, and at an earlier age than we are in the US.
Right. Do you have siblings?
I'm an only child.
So yes. So that is a lot.
That adds to it. But again, very supportive family. And it's an honor to go back there. It's much easier for me to go back than for my parents to come here. My mother first came to Israel in, I think she's going to say 1967, so right after the Six-Day War, and loves being here. She absolutely loves being here. She's a Jewish educator, so Israel really hits it for her. Hasn't been back for a few years. My dad, like I said, his first time here was in 2012.
Wow.
Which again, I don't have immediate relatives here. I grew up with Israelis, right? Family, friends, but not blood. And I also grew up as, I'm a fourth generation American.
Wow.
Dad does not speak any other language except English. He can't watch subtitled films. Not that he's not a cultured man. He's quite cultured man. In fact, we were just sharing jazz tracks before he went to the hospital. But, very American, right? Everyone speaks English. Why are you not? He loved it here. Not to say that it wasn't difficult at times communicating, including the moment we had a flat tire in the middle of the Golan Heights on one of those very steep impacts up, and we had a flat tire, and obviously everyone's panicking a bit, and you have, it's a 2-lane road, and what do you do? And we went into one of the Druze towns, and of course I spoke very confidently with the repair shop, but it was still this moment of, we're not, this can work.
Right. Can you see them moving over here at all?
No.
Not even a glimmer.
I mean, there's visiting again. It's not going to happen. And
never say never. We've seen a lot of parents follow their kids here, and a lot of them were surprising.
My dad's going to love that. Mark, you're going to love the hospital today. I did not script them to say that. My family and my cousins as well. I have a huge extended family. Most of them have been here. Not everyone has been here before. They can understand and respect why I'm here, and certainly all the work I've been doing since. And also understanding it's, I think we make Aliyah for inherently irrational reasons. And I help explain people that, when they get frustrated and then when they feel like leaving, because we leave for rational reasons. But first off, I'm here for irrational reasons. It can be Zionism, an ideology. It can be escapism, right? We're sick and tired of the old place. We're escaping something. We're in love with something or someone. We just want to try something new. And as long as we can embrace that, that helps us get through it. But that's also very scary for some people. Like I talked about, those life decisions you have to think about a lot sooner than later. If you're not ready to embrace something irrational, inherently irrational, wait a few more years to think about Aliyah, because it really is that trip. It's going to play with all your emotions all at once in a great way, in an amazing way, in a way that's so transformative as a human being. Again, you're going to mature so much faster here than I think you will in your respective country of origin. But you have to be prepared for that, and you need to have your support system, both here in Israel and back in your country of origin, for that to really work effectively. If you don't have
or online.
Online, no, I'm saying both places, but it needs to be at least grounded in one of those places, because otherwise, like for the greatest example I give to people is, what do you do in your first few weeks, if not months, if not years, when Friday night comes around and you don't have a meal to go to? And that feeling of being by yourself is really scary, because you've never had to be by yourself ever. You've been in a family, you've been in a community, you've been wherever it is, and all of a sudden you're by yourself. And it's not just by yourself in the middle of the week, it's Shabbat. What do you do? How are you going to cope? What is your coping mechanisms inside of you? If you don't have them already, you got to find them fast. And again, that growth, that self-growth is so amazing to have here. But you have to know it's going to happen.
We had a great question along these lines. Let me go to it. Someone asked earlier, if you, looking back now, you made Aliyah how many years ago?
14 and a half.
14 and a half years ago. And you were 24.
Yes.
So looking back now, are you glad you made Aliyah when you did? Would you have waited longer? Should you have made Aliyah earlier? Like, was it a good time to come?
It's a great question. I would say that I can always doubt, I can always nitpick and say, well, I could have saved some more money, or I could have waited until I was a little bit more senior in my career to move here. I think there's always going to be those doubts. I think doing it certainly earlier than later, when you have less obligations, financial, family, so forth, makes it a little bit easier to explore. Because it's also, you're finding yourself anew. You really have that opportunity to create yourself again. I like the idea of it being a continuum of where you're from, but people like that escapism also. So yes, being at an earlier age does help. The older you are, you have a lot more obligations. You have a lot more things to take care of that may be harder to let go of or harder to do remotely. So in that respect, yeah, it can be more difficult. I would say, again, it really has to be you embracing this new opportunity and embracing the irrationality of it, embracing the challenge of it, and being okay with that. I would say, though, the thing that makes or breaks Aliyah, at least in my perspective, is how much you prepare in advance. Not just what I'm talking about now, the emotional awareness and all of that, is the Hebrew. We have so many new resources to learn Hebrew in our own way, in our own comfort zone, wherever we are in the world. Duolingo, all these other free apps. Learning Hebrew before you step foot in Israel makes the difference in your, what we call klita. Klita is the word for absorption. Really the word I focus more on than Aliyah. Aliyah is the paperwork, it's the flight, it's the landing. The moment you land, it's klita. And the day after, it's, I talk about this with regards to my birthday. My birthday is wonderful. I had nothing to do with my birthday. Again, God bless my parents. The day after my birthday is the day I'm in charge of. It's the day I decide to do what I want with it.
We'll give you a few years. A few years after your birthday.
You're right. But klita is what we decide to do with this mantle of citizenship. What do we want to do with it? It's not just paying bills and taxes and voting next week. It's what more can we do with this identity? And I think that speaks a lot to certainly my fellow American Jews. We come with an ethic of giving back more than we currently have, whether that's volunteering, whether that's donating. One of the challenges I find a lot here, change subjects ever so slightly, but it still has to do with age. One of the challenges I find for myself and for fellow Olim is the lack of opportunity to volunteer in Israel. We have a tremendous, we have a tremendous third sector, a nonprofit sector in Israel, doing a lot of the work that unfortunately the government sometimes should be doing, but it falls on these nonprofits. These nonprofits are dependent on donations from abroad, from Israelis. They still don't know, we were talking about before at the beginning about translating themselves to a larger audience. They still don't know how to do that in good English. And they don't know how to capture all of these Olim who actually know some of these donors and some of the resources out there to help them. They don't know how to use them. I was volunteering for an organization, definitely not going to say their name, because they do amazing holy work in Israel. But it got to a point where they couldn't facilitate the group that I had enlisted to help them get money from abroad. They didn't know what to do because it wasn't part of their existing structure, and they couldn't pivot in a way that would make sense for them with that preconceived structure. But for us was like, you're a nonprofit. Of course you need a lay board, and of course you need help with international relations with that. And you see this again and again with a lot of community organizations, that when we become advocates for ourselves and our experiences and our talents in Hebrew, not just in English, in Hebrew, we're going to be such a force in this society that the age at which we come in is going to be so much easier, regardless if you're 24 or 48 or past retirement, because we're going to lay that foundation by showing what we have to offer. We have so much to offer. Hebrew is going to be that big hurdle. Once we pass that hurdle, there's so much more opportunity for us, in the way that I talk about Israel is the American dream. Israel, by being a young country with so many things yet to be done, is that notion of anyone can come here and anyone can make their dreams come true, because we just need it here. There's so much left to get done.
So you'd say that I always like to say that we are a big fish in a small pond. I remember when we were coming back, I made Aliyah twice. That's why I work at Nefesh B'Nefesh, professional Aliyah maker. So when I came back with my family, when my daughter was 9, she was devastated because we were ruining her chances of becoming a celebrity and making it big in Hollywood. So I told her that it was much easier to go that way in Israel and become a celebrity in Israel. It's because you're a big fish in a small pond, as opposed to her very slim chances. She's not watching this. And
even now, more unfortunately for you, because all these Israelis are becoming stars in Hollywood. So also,
it's true. Tell her that.
All right. But I was just remarking about this the other day with someone, that cult of celebrity that we have in America. I walk down the street, I live a block off Rothschild, the center of the city here. And this actually is the center of Tel Aviv, the heart of the city. And you'll see celebrities that you see all the time on TV. You'll see celebrity chefs and all these people. And it's like, I could care less. Like, you're riding your bike on the sidewalk, which is illegal. I'd rather the municipality than fawn over you. And I like that. I like that reality. I like, as gruff as that may be and as sort of not flashy, but I like that. I like that normality we have to our lives here. As much as there's so much more to do, and you can hear, I'm not for lack of ambition, but I also like normalcy that we have, that we often don't in our countries of origin, because we're already a minority and we're outpacing and outperforming in so many amazing, incredible ways. But it's nice to be able to be a majority, and it's nice to be, flat for even if it's a few minutes.
Right, because it's more, you can focus your energies on other things and develop yourself in other ways and grow Precisely. And do things that you wouldn't have been able to do because you're so focused on making yourself heard, or just going with the flow, which is also a struggle sometimes. Interesting. Okay, so there's one more question here, and do you think that Olim have an easier time of it making Aliyah now than when you came 14 years ago?
I would definitely
think like age for age. Like if you were to come as a 24-year-old now, or you know people who come at that age now, would you?
Yeah, I think part of it is the numbers. We're just a larger population than we were before, and what we lack in quantity, we make up for in quality, and we're starting to do that much more. We're starting to manifest that much more. Again, we talked about before. If it's not here, we create it. That's an ethic we have. As Jews from other countries. It's why Nefesh B'Nefesh was created in the first place. It was filling a need that was not being done through the process of Aliyah. Same thing with all the organizations, Shara, that you help build, that I build. If it's not there, we'll build it, because we know there's a community for it. And the more we're here, the more those institutions exist, and that then attracts more people to move here because they know there's an infrastructure. It's just like we said before about Tel Aviv, right? 5-7 years ago, Tel Aviv was not the epicenter of Anglo Aliyah like it is today. There's parts of Tel Aviv you can walk around and you will only hear English and French. That was not the case. It still boggles people's minds what we call the Hebrew city, right? That's one of the nicknames of Tel Aviv. There are areas you will not hear Hebrew, and it's English and with their Olim.
Wow.
So there's so much more infrastructure. I would say it's easier. And that's a good and bad thing, because you can live your life here in Israel completely in your native language, especially the Western language. I would say that's not a full, complete citizenship. I won't say that's successful or not Aliyah. That's not the point. It's about your citizenship and what you do with it. So to not interact in Hebrew, I think is a detriment, because we have so much to give to Israeli society. Every wave of Aliyah in Israel has changed society in some way. Former Soviet Union had a huge impact. Jews from Muslim countries, huge impact. The Germans of the 20s and 30s, huge impact. We're the last one, and we have so much we have yet to give to Israeli society to make it a better place for all of us. But
there's always work to be done, you're saying.
There's always work to be done, number one, but number two, what we don't have in numbers yet, stressing that for our audience yet.
We're working on it.
Right? We have a lot of quality that we bring to the audience. And everything I do, I try to focus on quality and not quantity. If I don't have 100 people at an event, those 10 people who show up are having an actual, honest, really soul-searching conversation that they leave feeling all the more inspired by, rather than a frontal lecture with 5 minutes of Q&A. I would rather have that first format with 10 people any day. And the more we have those opportunities and create those for people and for Olim, the better our quality of life will be.
Okay, so Jay, I know that you're very immersed in Israeli culture and the Hebrew language, but there are some things that you've taken with you from your previous culture and your previous home. I think tonight you're going out to celebrate something we all know as St. Patrick's Day.
It's a very important holiday. So first off, two things. One is a collared shirt. Living in Israel, I at first embraced that casualness of t-shirt and jeans for a long time, and for various reasons.
I won't get up and show you what I'm wearing.
Fair enough. Look, it's pandemic time, but at the same time, that has changed a lot for me. That has changed a lot of the respect I give to myself and to others, and also to understand, like, until ironically the Americanization of Israeli culture took place in the last few decades, Israelis dressed up. Like, it's not a weather thing, right? Jews from Berlin, Baghdad, Casablanca, Cairo dressed up for regular occasion, button-down shirts, a coat, if it was appropriate. Like, and it's not about the weather. It's this notion that we brought from America about this casual thing. So you'll see Israeli CEOs, older people, dressing like it's casual Friday every day of the week and thinking that's fancy wear.
But less so. I remember in the 80s, 90s, I'm dating myself now, but in the 80s and 90s, you'd turn on the news and you'd see people sitting there in rumpled jeans and t-shirt, like you said, but you don't see that anymore.
You don't see it as much. You still see it. And now there's actually laws in place that can happen. So for example, if you're getting service from a municipality, at least here in Tel Aviv, they can no longer wear t-shirt and jeans when it's a clerk person, and banks are changing that. To go to a bank in Israel when I made Aliyah and to see the teller or the person who's handling, the thousands of dollars that you brought in savings from America in a t-shirt and jeans, you're like,
instill confidence.
Right. So that's one, but it also happens to be green stripe because it is St. Patrick's Day. And I think that's an important thing to point out for Jews, because put aside the alcohol aspect of it.
I can't with this. Yeah. Okay.
Put aside the alcohol aspect of the holiday. St. Patrick's Day is the most non-Jewish Jewish holiday there is. Because the way it's celebrated.
Not Thanksgiving.
Not Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is an American holiday through and through. God willing, it will soon be an Israeli holiday, just like Imuna for Moroccans and Sheik It for Ethiopians is. When we have enough of us, Thanksgiving will be the next one after the Russians. Anyways.
But those are actually Jewish holidays in those other countries.
They're Jewish holidays, but they celebrate a diaspora ethnic community. And that they're now national holidays is really impressive for Israel. So, enough.
Your Uncle Barry says hi.
Hey, Barry. It's always nice to have relatives here. I would otherwise be in Cincinnati right now for Pesach, so hopefully soon enough I'll be back there. But no, St. Patrick's Day celebrates the cultural identity of this ethno-national immigrant group in America that has attached to a very specific piece of land. And when you take that one description, that applies to Jews. It applies to so many, particularly to Jews, who are an ethnicity a nationality, a religion, a culture, a history, all those things Irish can also claim. Like the Irish, we had to overcome a lot of obstacles to make it into American society. And those obstacles, we created even stronger ties to our country of origin. The Irish, so much so that a lot of their more recent reforms are based on Jews in Israel. So, for example, now have a law of return. If you can prove you had a grandfather who was a grandparent who was Jewish, you can get Irish citizenship. They have a form of birthright Israel for Irish descendants.
I did not know this.
And so when you think about St. Patrick's Day like that, it connects us back to our own identity. How do we juggle all the different identities we have, whether it's in Israel, and frankly, whether it's in America, right? Here in Israel, how much more do we own our American identity and our Jewish identity than we did back in our country of origin, and vice versa? St. Patrick's Day is a nice reminder of that struggle we always have, and we're going to continue to have. I love having these multiple identities that I constantly have to juggle, both in America, but also here. How much more American I am in Israel versus how Israeli I've become when I'm in America is astounding.
Absolutely.
And I know that's a common thing. Exactly. It's a common thing for the longer you're in Israel.
Or you just become neither.
Using its Jewish identity, whoever just posted that. That's not what I'm saying. Actually, we're getting stronger with it because we're internalizing our Jewish identity in a way that's so much more authentic. We're wrestling with things that we didn't have the opportunity, the luxury, I want to say, being in diaspora, we don't always have the luxury to do. When Jewish identity is a choice, like it is in diaspora, we choose the things that make the most sense for us in our time structure, in our own ways. When we're in Israel, we're in an entirely Jewish context. We can really focus on the things that we want to focus on. One of the things that really interests me to focus, one of my next projects, is not just on what it means to be a mensch, and there is no word for mensch in Hebrew. Mensch is a Yiddish word. There is no word for a gentleman in Hebrew. That's one part I'm working on. The other one is on diplomacy, right? Jews have been in the business of diplomacy for centuries. What are the values that are inherently Jewish that go in diplomacy, and vice versa? That connects us both to our Jewish identity and to a larger global identity, which is at the heart of who we've been for thousands of years, and now having our own country, we can do even more so with the paperwork, which I think is just an absolute treasure and honor to be a part of as well. I try not to take it for granted. And I always try to find new ways to challenge myself as a result. And certainly having election day next week definitely helps with that challenge.
Yes. So everybody go out and vote. We're not going to say for who. We're
not going to say for who, but absolutely vote.
Vote. This has been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking to you and hearing your story. Continue spreading the word and teaching Hebrew and doing the things that you do. Check in with us every once in a while, and we're happy to follow everyone. Go follow Jay Rosen on, where can they follow you? On Instagram?
I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, no Twitter, bad Twitter. Instagram, Facebook. You are welcome if you're thinking about Aliyah. Highly recommend you to sign up for our Cafe Au Lait sessions. They're every Monday afternoon. We start Pesach.
You can check out our Facebook page for the list of upcoming Cafe Au Lait. We also have an event page on our website that you can check out. I'll put it in put a link right now. Go ahead.
Really just helpful that you're not going to learn in the classroom. For those of you who are looking to be here and experience what it means to live a full life in Israel, a full-time life rather is the word. In Israel, really trying to focus on those words, and we're really focused towards intro level. So you don't have to have any Hebrew behind you. I put in the nikud, those dots and bars that indicate vowel sounds. I transliterate the words. You don't need to be able to read Hebrew to get through our lesson, I promise.
You could also get by in English for a while, right? In Israel, we don't want to put people off who are scared of the Hebrew learning thing, and ease into it slowly.
It's not as scary as it seems. Like I said,
Israelis love practicing. Right.
Yes. Israelis love practicing, but put your fears towards math rather than a language, and you'll do well in Israel.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jay. Happy St. Patrick's Day. And shout out
Thank
to
you so
my
much.
brother and sister-in-law whose anniversary it is today. Happy anniversary to all. We're celebrating. And thank you very much, Jay.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.